we could all just click continue if you're okay with the recording.
Okay, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Great, okay, thanks a lot. So thanks for coming. So I'm going to be talking about some issues to do with the climate and ecological emergency that affects Kent and how that relates to other parts of the world as well, and then come round to like the underlying sort of causes of this and how what we can do. So I should say I'm a biologist. Like my day job is studying cancer biology. So I don't like have any direct like I don't make a connection between that and the climate and ecological emergency. But like I hope that I can bring a sort of scientific perspective to this, and I really would like to open up a discussion afterwards. So anyway, I hope that's positive. So one way that climate change is already affecting the Kent area is that so this is Domaine Evremond. It's a vineyard that has been planted by a well-known French company called Taittinger, I believe. And so this is a clear acknowledgement from them, a large long-term investment due to the changing suitability of parts of Europe to growing grapes. This is also similar processes affecting France. So whereas it may benefit the Kent area, this diagram shows the Burgundy region. Can you see that? It seems to have got clipped a little bit. I know.
Yes.
All right. So anyway, this data, believe it or not, goes back to the Middle Ages. Growing grapes for wine is a very, very difficult process. You know, it relies on knowledge over generations to get the best. And you can see there's a pretty sharp change in the last few decades in the date that grapes are harvested. And I understand that this is changing the flavor of wines and stuff. It's like, not wine, not wine, not wine too. Anyway, I guess my point here is that this is something that is potentially going to benefit Kent in the short term. So I really see this as a issue of fairness, right? Rather than any short-term like loss that's going to affect us right now. Other things that are changing, you know, it's not just grapes. Grapes are especially difficult to grow, but lots of other like staple crops are going through big changes. So this is just in 1 year, apparently. 2020 was an unusual year, and the types of crops that were planted is going through big changes. I think farmers are like well aware of the, you know, relatively shifts in the seasons and rainfall patterns, and so they are planting totally different crops. I should say, yeah, I'm not a farmer, and so it's harder for me to get a really clear sense of the longer term trends. But I think the message is that while it's people are very aware of this. People that grow crops are paying very clear attention to the direction that this is going. This is happening all around us, like each year. Certainly any change to staple crops seems like much more of a concern. You know, this isn't affecting food right now, but it is a significant food security issue. This is a picture from Russia. It's towards, the east of Russia, out towards like Vladivostok. And this is from an article called "How Russia Wins the Climate Crisis." I think expectations are that as the climate warms, that large parts of Russia will become more amenable to growing staple crops. And so we'll be able to support a larger population. That's, I don't know, that's one thing for Russia. But of course, there are the expectation is that while Russia warms and becomes more amenable to crops, large parts of the equatorial region will become much less amenable to it. So these graphs take some explaining. You can see that this comes from a paper from 3 or 4 years ago. The color here refers to the number of days per year above some temperature threshold, which is considered difficult to survive. So you can see at the moment there are certain parts of like the Sahara and other areas in the equatorial region where there are some days in this kind of range. So there are parts of the world now that are very, very hot for parts of the year, and sometimes people live there, but it is difficult. It's more difficult to create like a year-round crop rotation to support a lot of people. And you can see these different scenarios. The RCP scenarios are have to do with how much warming will occur over the next several decades. I think this is before the end of the century. And so under the more extreme scenarios, so RCP 8.5 is quite an extreme scenario. This corresponds to us not really doing anything and about climate change. And so this is what we would expect by the end of the century under a fairly extreme not doing anything scenario. And you can see this is horrifying. This is very large parts of the equator where billions of people live that are uninhabitable for much of the year. And so where are these people going to go? Russia, I guess, is a possibility. This is a massive disruption, of course. Like it's, we shouldn't, I think the reason I showed the Russia slide is to try and get away from presenting this as just an unremitting disaster, but just as a issue of fairness and disruption. Things will, life will go on, things will continue to happen, the decades will go past, but this is unprecedented change. I guess that's the message, and this is something that we can deal with in a more positive or a less positive way. All right, the next slide is about, so it's not only just a linear change. It's not just that the temperature will incrementally go up, because I think that is one thing that's difficult to process about the situation, is that it's not just while these long-term trends are gradual and take decades to come on, the effects that occur to individuals are come in short shocks. So this is something that you guys have asked about, is the risks of flooding. So this shows flooding, reported floods or reported disasters, including floods. The floods are in blue, worldwide over the last few decades. My cousin, for example, the other day was asking me like, oh, so how are these changes, the climate and ecological situation, how is that going to affect me? You know, what's going to affect me first? And I'm hearing you guys say that too. And I think floods is a clear example. And it's hard to know when that's going to happen, and it's hard to quantify. I've certainly heard from you guys saying like, oh, but how much will it increase? And I think this graph in some ways answers that, but in some ways this is the answer, and in some ways that's not the answer at all. The truth is there won't be a flood until suddenly there is, and so that's why it's really hard to feel the effects of climate change on you in your day to day, because for so long there is no flooding, and then suddenly, so this is a picture of flooding in the UK. I mean, many of you have talked about having experienced floods, and obviously that can be devastating to a community. And so increasing floods puts an increasing drain on the whole of society. So the next picture is a similar picture from Jakarta. This is Jakarta, capital of Indonesia. And apparently the level of flooding there has meant that they're considering moving the capital city. They're putting up like seawalls, they're spending billions on defenses against flooding. And Indonesia, of course, is a country that's just less able to deal with these kinds of shocks than the UK is. And why is that? So this has to do with this shows the or this is trying to capture the responsibility for climate change overall. And you can see that the global richest 10%, which includes most people, almost everyone in the UK, is responsible for overwhelmingly more emissions than the poorest 50%. So again, this is trying to capture an issue of fairness, right? If you're trying to worry about, I think trying to motivate people to join the climate movement because of imminent threats, I feel like is not necessarily the right way to go about it, because nothing will happen for a long time and then all of a sudden it's terrible. Whereas if you try and frame the issue as one of global fairness, this is something that makes people feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves, rather than just like trying to defend against something that will come at an uncertain time. So again, something for discussion. This is another way of trying to, I guess, broaden the same point. So this comes from the Global Footprint Network. They add up lots and lots of different kinds of ecological indicators to do with farmland and forests and all kinds of things, and they try and estimate how many Earths each country would need if everyone in the world consumed in the way that the people of that country did. So the UK is rated at 3. We're apparently using 3 Earths when of course we only have 1. And you'll note down the bottom of the list is India at 0.6. So it's a larger country, and even with their very large population, they're still not in an ecological deficit, you know, according to this calculation. So again, this really sort of underlines the global, the issue of global fairness, that like while we will be suffering floods in the UK and we shouldn't like downplay that, like ultimately the impacts will land a lot harder on areas in the tropics in particular, where a lot of poorer countries are. And they are poorer for a very clear reason. Like, it's not an accident. This comes from hundreds of years of us, of people from the global north going down there and trying to exploit and extract the that part of the world, its people and its resources. So again, this photo is the Earthrise photo taken on one of the Apollo missions. I just again, I guess I
think you've frozen, Alex.
of a spiritual overview, and you might not think of that as a sort of a science subgroup in XR of
Alex, we're having trouble hearing you. You keep going in and out, so we're missing what you're saying.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. Okay, I'm not sure how to remedy that. I could turn my video off. Do you think that would help?
Yeah, try that. Yeah.
All right.
Is it okay to go from the start of that slide, please?
Yeah.
Which one?
Yeah, the one you're talking about
slide.
now.
This one here.
Yeah. That's when we've had trouble hearing you, from this one.
Oh, okay, cool. I think I'm trying to argue that the change that we are looking for has many aspects of like a religion, ultimately, that it has to be international. It has to do with something larger than our own individual consumption and threats to us, just our individual person. There are a number of social scientists within XR that are studying religious groups and trying to understand the ways that religious and non-religious people come to or see the situation. And I'm finding that really interesting. Again, this is something for discussion, but I feel like as a scientist, this is something that I've neglected for or not taken seriously enough until quite recently. So I guess this is another way of trying to make the same point, is like, as well as this is an issue that affects like the world as a whole, but it is also an issue that is playing out over generations, right? So I put these numbers in. This is a little calculator that you can find on the website in the corner, and I put in dates for me and my nephew. I don't have a child, but the point is that up to the year 2050, the different colored lines, so that you see there's a red trajectory, a orange one, and a blue one. These correspond to different emissions scenarios. As I mentioned previously, there was a low emissions scenario, a medium, and a high. And you can see that up to 2050, the lines aren't so far apart. And so I think that again underlines the fact that for much of my lifetime, much of the rest of my lifetime, the changes that we can expect in terms of flooding and climate migration and stuff, there is a modest amount that we can do. Not to say that we can't affect those outcomes, because we certainly can, but I think the larger divergence between the high, medium, and low scenarios comes you know, after my nephew, that is, finishes school, after his child is born. And so we're talking about effects that will just cascade through the generations, right? And so that's again how seeing this as like an issue of like intergenerational fairness and justice is possibly a better way of understanding the situation than in terms of like immediate impacts. Again, I don't know whether that's motivating. So this is like, again, hopefully something that we can discuss later. This is a zoom in effectively of the previous plot, where we're just focused right in on the present, and the differences are very stark. So the lower scenarios that will have modest, or you know, where the long-term impacts will be much lower, involve a sharp reduction starting really soon. I think this is a really important point to make, that even though the changes that, even though we can have the biggest impact in a generation or two's time, the sooner we act, the better. And this is because the global emissions have been going up very, very rapidly, as you can see. So the sooner you start, as soon as you take the sooner you take the off ramp, the better. But equally, if you miss the first off ramp and you take the second one, that's, you know, that's second best, but that's still highly, highly worth it. So maybe it's a bit misleading to have a gap in here, because like any time that we turn the corner is, you know, it's never too late to correct a mistake, kind of thing. All right, so this slide I feel like is, I really like it as a way to summarize the whole situation. So I guess I won't go through it in too much detail. It comes from Julia Steinberger. If you know that, she is if you know her, she's a scientist that covers this kind of field, I think, very well. So on the left of this slide, you can see aspects to do with the physical. It says physical, natural, and technological. So these are more anyway, to do with the situation, the physical situation as it is, and then the social situation that's on the right hand side. So I feel like this is an interesting way of describing the situation and capturing it as a whole. So the first row saying that climate and ecological crises are really bad, that's part of the diagnosis. That's an important thing to acknowledge. But equally, on the right hand side, it's really important to acknowledge that our economies, our political economy are responsible. Like, this wasn't an accident. This didn't just happen. This was part of a social situation. Equally, the prognosis and the prevention, there is a physical, like a scientific, if you say, or a natural science element to it, or a way of looking at it, and there is a social science way of looking at it. So we, the people, have the power to be a necessary counterforce to fossil fuel industries. There are two sort of social dynamics pushing in opposite directions, and the treatment, the way that we do that is like, we must do this ourselves. Like, as a, you know, this is an issue for democracy ultimately, like people working together and building like decision-making power, basically political power. Like there's there's no one else that will like come and create these decisions. Like, it has to come from a local level. It has to come from individuals. Like, all of us are political actors. I think that's something that I find motivating. Is like, if I don't support something, then that will be tallied in various ways. There are lots of polling firms that measure like how much support different policies have, and so your political views and actions are measured and have a real effect. You can influence other people, you can act collectively, and that's something that we don't often appreciate. Anyway, so again, there are many things that we can do in order to create collective action to address this situation and work towards a healthier society, a better world. All right, so this was quite a rapid change. Sorry, I didn't really work that transition very well. So this is a recent action from Money Rebellion. So I guess what I meant to say was that I felt like the previous slide captured the fact that there are various processes within the economy that have led to these steeply increasing graphs of emissions. This is all part of the how we got to where we are. The reliance on extraction and exploitation from the political economy is a part of it. There is a growth imperative within the economic system, and so I have found the XR's targeting of the economic and financial system to be really interesting. I think that's a thoughtful sort of, it's potentially a sensitive point where society can turn the corner and work towards a better world. I think I put this slide up because I feel like this action in particular is contentious, right? I think breaking windows, a lot of people don't see that as, I don't know, positive. They don't want to engage that, and yet it got in a lot of newspapers. So the Daily Telegraph covered it and the Sun covered it, and it was mixed. There was positive coverage and there was negative coverage. I was surprised how well it went over ultimately. But again, it's contentious. Like it makes me feel uncomfortable as well. A second action to do with Money Rebellion. So this is happening all over the UK, not just in like the City of London. Stickering actions is something that you can do in local on a local level. And again, when I first heard about this didn't feel, it sort of feels like vandalism, but I have really come round to seeing this as part of a larger process of trying to humiliate the banks into dropping their support for oil companies. Many universities, big universities, have given up investing. They've taken their endowments away from fossil fuels, and that's been a huge win for campaigners. But my understanding is that oil companies don't rely on their share price nearly as much, right? If a university sells its stock in an oil company, then another hedge fund, for example, will buy it. Whereas oil companies are much more reliant on short-term funding from banks such as HSBC. And so a campaign to humiliate such banks into cutting their ties would potentially damage or hurt oil companies in a way that divestment campaigns don't. And so while on the face of it, attaching stickers to an ATM, you may not feel completely positive about that. It might be hard to make the connection between that and the previous slides of flooding and global fairness. But I feel like this is part of a broader international campaign of humiliating the banks and the people that work there, and trying to make this open. Like, the people that work at the banks are not made of stone, and they recognize the problems with the system as well. But so if you can make that open, if you can make that public so that they know and their friends and family know, and that everyone knows, then that's really potentially a way to enact social change. And this is another thing that I wanted to mention, is the Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill, which many of you may know about. And again, these are two things that don't immediately feel compelling to me. Like getting something like engaging with social media is something that I feel quite reluctant about. And yet, if the Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill can be made to trend on Twitter on the day of the second reading, that's a way for a lot more people to hear about it. And that's, again, the only way for more people to hear about it and more people to get in touch with their MP is that's how bills get passed. That's how social change happens. And so the Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill already has support from 100 MPs, which again is a start. I feel like that is a very surprising number, compelling buy-in from MPs. And then in the bottom right, this is a local newspaper talking about protests about the Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill. I don't read a local newspaper, but again, this is a way of reaching out to people at a local level, and potentially getting through to a demographic that wouldn't have heard of the Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill before. And so I think all of these actions together, I guess the point I'm trying to make is that individual actions on their own sometimes seem small. They sometimes seem something that it's something that is hard to feel excited about. But as a wider movement, and all connected together, they add up to something that's really valuable and can lead to meaningful social change. So I know that many of you guys are part of the Trust the People initiative, and I find that really compelling. I feel like community building is ultimately central to this whole process. Anyway, I hope that's a few ideas for a discussion. So thanks very much for having me, and I'd be really glad to answer any questions.
That's great, Alex. Thanks very much. Was anyone like to raise their hand to say? Jeremy, would you like to ask a question?
Hi, Alex. Yeah, let's go back to flooding because we always like to. You said sort of a flood isn't there and then it happens, which is true for an inland extreme weather event type flood. But one of the two things that are going to be going on the coast, for instance, we'll have sea level rise, which is semi-predictable, and tides, which are wholly predictable, followed by storm surges to magnify it, which they're the non-predictable bits. But yeah, it's not wholly floods just happen or they don't. I mean, with sea level rise, floods will progressively come upon us and we will see them coming. Have you got anything to say about that? And do you know of any specific research which we ought to go to that we can claim to be authoritative on sea level rise?
Yes, you did ask about that before. So I have a couple of papers which I should send over, which talk about the predictions for sea level rise. I think there are, it does change rapidly, so I think it is hard to get a single sort of final estimate. But you asked specifically for the wave action coming up for G7. So certainly, as of right now, it would be quite possible to come up with a I have a couple of papers which I will send that I can recommend as good estimates to go with. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely super. Yeah, that's what we're looking for. Yeah.
Anybody else? Yes, Izzy?
Hi, that was a really great talk, Alex. Thanks for that. It was really interesting, some of the points. I was just going to pick up a bit on the bit when you kind of talked about how it's more important to share the, I forget how you called it now, something like global fairness, rather than to concentrate on like the flooding, the kind of direct thing that's going to happen to people here. But if we kind of think about this as a wider, like what's going on right now in places like Bangladesh and stuff, they have flooding right now. We know about it, but let's be honest, most people in this country, they don't care, or they care, but like, you know, and I think the story that we emit more, everyone knows that as well. Everyone knows we're a richer country. Like, this isn't a new thing. People know about colonialism. They know about the link to climate and colonialism. And I think there's like a big pushback from people on the top as well to try and stop that rhetoric being spread. But like what I'm thinking about is I've been in the climate movement for quite a while, and it's been really rewarding recently to see how it's now on the telly. People, you know, now you can see like bamboo toothbrushes in just your average shop rather than having to go, you know, so like it's those little things. So it's now kind of out there. But for me, it's like it's about how are people going to take actions from that. And I think actually to push the story that it is going to happen right here in Kent. Unfortunately, I don't agree with that. I agree with you. It should be a global thing. It should be about global fairness. But I actually don't think that's going to work for the mainstream people to get them to do action. I really think we have to push, like, yeah, there's going to be flooding in Kent, because unfortunately, most people are only interested if it's about them and it's about their grandkids, you know? So that's just my opinion.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot. It's a good point. I think just it's not obvious that crises actually have the effect that you want, right? So after like Katrina in the US, the areas that were hit are some of the most Republican, right? They often push back against environmental regulation, even when they recognize that their environment has been degraded. So it's complicated. I think short-term shocks like that don't always suddenly make everyone wake up. So I feel like another point which I sort of got lost a bit in the end was that because we have a lot of unprecedented challenges coming up, there's likely a tendency for political systems to act quickly without without getting input from the electorate. And so this is a really strong argument for me for the Citizens Assembly part of the Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill. And it feels to me like a lot of countries, a lot of political systems are tending towards less democracy, right? Like so the more people get scared, the more people feel like there are going to be damaging or there are threats to their way of life coming soon, and they don't get a sense of agency. If they do feel a sense of threat and don't feel a sense of agency, that is, people are more inclined to reach for like top-down sort of authoritarian kind of solutions. So that's something that I really worry about, and that's why I feel I agree with you that like it's really important not to sugarcoat the damage to Kent and the changes that will come, but I feel like it's important to make it as part of a wider story.
Yeah, well, it was just going from Izzy's point and your response really is that you know, in that Steinberger's slide where the last one says, you know, this radical change is compatible with universal human well-being and healthier societies, which is where you said, you know, it's got to be this kind of global fairness thing. And from what Izzy was saying, I've been thinking about, you know, how when we start our People's Assembly here in Thanet, you know, like, you know, having this kind of desire to sort of act fast because of the climate emergency, but at the same time you've got to engage community, and that isn't going to happen unless you really kind of find out what's important to them. And there are so many people that have really, you know, lives have changed much for the worse during this last sort of pandemic year, and it's going to get worse with Brexit, you know, like looming. Well, I mean, I know it's happened, but it's kind of going to bite, you know, probably won't bite more until next year. And so I think if we start this process by, you know, like trying to just engage people about what's important to them, then hopefully, you know, because people are so kind of disconnected from even their neighbors, you know, so I think hopefully once you kind of maybe try to kind of help to focus on their current needs, that can have that effect of eventually kind of seeing that actually there is this connection. And once they feel more connected, I think, to their community, they will start perhaps feeling more of a kind of kinship with the global community. Does that make sense? Or I'm not being too idealistic, am I? That's how it feels to me anyway. You know, that's where I feel like the transformational potential is so huge with these kind of people's assemblies or community assemblies, which we can do. We can't expect to wait for the citizens' assemblies, which is the sort of national one that, you know, with all the sortition, etc. So yeah, I just wanted to make that point. And I've got Jeremy with his hand up. Jeremy.
You know, it's coming on the back of what Deb's just got to there, which is, you know, get people to understand their own potential problems and then say that you've got it easy. Actually, even in 2070, you'll have it easy compared to some other people. And I'd like to stitch together two slides there. One was the one where you showed the parts of the earth where it would be difficult to live, I think, just to summarize. And the other is the one of how many Earths does that country's lifestyle require if it's spread. And it's interesting, there's one South American country on there, that's Brazil, no others, and there are no African countries on that. And I think if that actual graphic got spread a lot further towards and these guys aren't using very much, and if you played against that, here are the impacts, and it's the ones who are not doing anything at all particularly problematic who are going to have all of the biggest problems. I think those two messages put on the back end of what Deb's just said about, yeah, understand that you've got problems, but then understand that lots of other people have got even bigger problems. I think that's a powerful message.
Yeah, it is.
I was
You're right.
shocked when I saw that graph and said, yeah, but they haven't even gone as far as Africa. I mean, is Africa 0.1 or 0.2 or whatever? And I think we need to show that stuff as well as, you know, the bad guys. We need to show the sufferers as well.
Think,
did that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think all those countries are listed on the global.
Yeah. Okay, just missing off that graphic. Yeah, okay.
Does anybody else have anything they'd like to say or ask?
Yeah.
Yes, Mel?
Yeah, thanks for that. That was a really good discussion, and Alex, and really well thought out and everything. I really enjoyed that. I don't know, I've just got a question. I just wondered if you could inform me a bit more, but I've read somewhere that, you know, it's the main 1% of all these corporations and big companies like Shell, BP, that are causing most of the problems with climate change. And, you know, us little people, we can do all we can, but unless they radically change or stop doing what they're doing, then that's going to have the most dramatic effect on what's our climate. I was just wondering if you can fill me in a bit more on that, please, if you know.
Jeremy's got a direct point to just add to this.
Yeah,
Mel,
to
if that's
pick
okay.
up on that, strictly speaking, the oil companies themselves, they're just providing the rest of us with the means to cause the problem. We're the ones who've got the gas central heating and the cars and the SUVs and everything else. They're getting it out of the ground and processing it and giving to us. And actually, they are trying quite hard to make that process as environmentally friendly as they can, because if they don't, then they don't get the government grants that the government wants to give to them. So I think we can't put it all on the fossil fuel companies so much as on society as a whole, which is using fossil fuels. That said, we are taking the Oil and Gas Association and the Secretary of State for Energy to court very shortly for allowing loads more drilling on the UK continental shelf. So we are trying to stop them doing it. But do you get my point there?
I do get your point. It's like a vicious circle. You know, if they provided an alternative, obviously they're making huge profit out of it. And, you know, for us to survive in this current world, we need to have these energy sources. So if they kind of, who takes the first step, you know? Do you know what I mean?
But I don't think it's fair enough to just blame it all on the consumer, because, you know, when life is hard and you've got to get to work and that's your only way of getting to work or something is to get in a car, and you can't afford an electric car, then, you know, I don't think it's fair enough to put it on us. And if the government are still subsidizing it, you've got, you know, that's where something.
No, sorry, don't get me wrong. I said it's down. We're the ones using it. It's the system which is the problem. It's history which is the problem. It's lack of action now to change that path which is the problem.
But to be fair, there's the fossil fuel companies are trying to avoid. I mean, I don't believe they are doing all they can, because I'm reading a book right now written by a climate scientist who is saying, you know, exactly that. You know, they've been to ExxonMobil, ignored their own scientists back in the 70s, and are still.
Yeah, no, sorry, that's true. And if I tried to give if I gave the impression that I'm in favour of the oil companies, I'm not, because I'm actually a claimant on the court case taking the fossil fuel industry to court. So yeah, I just said, even if they weren't the baddies, they're part of the whole system. You're right, and they are the baddies.
Well, yeah.
Alex, did you want?
Okay.
Sorry, Matt. Did anyone want to say anything else about this issue? No.
Well, yeah, it's just, I mean, I believe that the technology is already there to make green cars or green everything, but, you know, there's not enough profit in it, and it means basically all the people who've owned all the oil for the last 100 years or whatever, they're not going to be powerful and rich anymore, and they don't want to give it up. So it's just, I don't know. I mean, I've always said if you could have an electric car that has 2 batteries in it, so it just charges itself, and therefore you don't need to pay anyone to get your electricity. You're just creating your self-sustaining car. So, but who's going to benefit out of that? Who's going to get rich out of that?
Do we have any other points that anyone would like to make? No. Yes, Jeremy.
Can Alex, can you send those? Can I give you my email address or to send those things to?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Can I stick it in the chat or?
Yeah, that works.
It's a yeah. I'll put it in the chat. Thanks very much.
Okay, well, it looks like we're more or less coming to a close. Has anyone got anything else to add? No. All right. Well, thanks so much, Alex, for a great presentation, and thanks everyone for coming. It's great, and I'm going to, you know, hopefully we can do a bit of working together when we think about creating some local community assemblies, because I think we'll need. They may well start online like this, you know, and then hopefully in person once we're allowed to meet in person, etc., you know. But I just wanted to say I went to this interesting 350.org, you know, that 350.org campaign organization, went to this online global conference yesterday, and they were talking about how, in terms of when they were trying to sort of just kind of forge ahead and, you know, work with different groups and work with different people, they found that actually they had to connect with the people on the issues where they were much more than they were doing. You know, they didn't need it to be this kind of, they were trying for it to be this kind of sleek thing that would make it all, you know, be all singing and all dancing. And some of the kind of anecdotal evidence or anecdotal information that they talked about was actually quite interesting and helpful to hear about how really it is just, it kind of is simpler than we might imagine in terms of just, you know, trying to connect with what's going on for people, you know, and maybe sometimes maybe even creating that space. But another thing was working with existing groups. So that's something to think about too. Okay, well, thanks very much for coming, everybody. Great to see you all. And yeah, we'll no doubt see you again soon.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Take good care.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you all.